These are just a few of the more common health impairments. We don't spend a whole lot of time on health impairments, but this is actually probably the most common thing you're going to see in the field. You're going to see people with diabetes, you're going to see people with cardiovascular disease or asthma, especially as our population becomes more and more obese. Diabetes and cardiovascular disease associated with obesity. And so you're going to see these issues, and it'll be important for you to know what to look for and what to be concerned about when working with these individuals. For diabetes, the main thing is to make sure they're checking their sugar, they're eating correctly. They may need a snack during or even after exercise, and knowing what types of snacks will be beneficial for your clients would be good as well. For cardiovascular disease, especially if it's a heart attack, heart failure, if they have a pacemaker, you're probably going to need to adjust the target heart rate when you're planning exercise for these individuals. They're not going to need to be participating in vigorous exercise. We want those ranges to be a little bit lower. And if you're doing moderate exercise, you want to check their heart rate often to make sure you're not going to push them too hard to where you're causing another injury. For asthma, just making sure their inhaler is available. Also checking the weather if you're going to be outside. Things that affect allergies can also stimulate asthma. It depends on the person, so you may check on that. If they just mowed the grass, that might make it more likely for them to have an asthma attack, things like that. For visual impairments, one thing to just make sure you understand is you can have a visual impairment without being completely blind. So visual impairment can be kind of a whole range, but it does mean that even after being corrected, after having contacts or glasses, they still are impaired to some degree. And so causes are many. Some of those are albinism, which I mentioned earlier, which is a disorder that's present from birth. Retinoblastoma, which is a tumor-like growth in the eye. Retinopathy, which is where your blood vessels are growing across your eye where they're not supposed to, and then they may burst and then cause damage to the retina. With aging, it's fairly common for vision to be impaired, and so as someone gets older, they may have cataracts, glaucoma. Cataracts affects kind of blurriness. Glaucoma affects the clarity. And cortical impairment is actually fairly interesting, which can relate to trauma as well. But it means the problem isn't in your eye, the problem is in your brain. So my eye is working fine. If I were to just record what was being reflected on my retina, it'd be perfectly fine. The problem is that the connection between my eye and my brain isn't processing the image. And so it's kind of a really interesting impairment. Very rare though. The other one is hearing impairment. It's talking about sensory loss. Again, it can be a complete deafness or it could be just a partial deafness. One interesting thing about the hearing impaired community is that they really don't care that much about person first language. They'd rather be called deaf or a deaf person rather than a person who is deaf. So that's the exception to the rule. It's hearing impaired individuals. There are two types of hearing loss. One is conductive, which means that there actually is a problem with something in the anatomy that's affecting their ability to hear, and that could be the result of congenital problems or trauma. The other one is sensory neural loss, which means that there was damage to the nerve or the cochlea. Sorry, that's misspelled there. That should say nerve, not never. And which caused by overstimulation. This one is fairly common for people working in industries where they're around loud machines, loud music all the time, So that can cause damage to the ear that results in permanent hearing loss. Okay, somebody who has a hearing impairment may also have difficulty with speech, and that's just because they hear the sound differently than you do. So they're not able to make the same adjustments to their speech that you can because they don't hear those little idiosyncrasies. With the speech impairment, again, it could be caused by a variety of different disorders. If you look in your book in those chapters, they'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. I really just wanted to show you, if you haven't heard Drew Lynch, he was starred on America's Got Talent a couple summers ago, came on as a comedian, did really well. I think he made it to the finals. But he's now using, the thing about him that I like is that he's a comedian that stutters, but he also makes light of his whole life, and the way that people interact with him and how they interact with him incorrectly. And so this is just a rant of his about people telling him that he's improving and he's getting better, even though he has a permanent disease, and what's kind of educating us on what's really changing. And so I thought you probably all could use some comic relief by now. So enjoy. Hi, everybody. Welcome. So that wraps us up. These are references if you're interested in looking up more information from these topics. A lot of these books I keep in my office. So if you're looking for a source later for your paper, you can come check those out for me.